Thank you, Mark. Mark knows how to embarrass me and make me uncomfortable by his all too kind introduction. Yes, and he succeeded again. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Aimee. Thank you to the Center for the Study of Citizenship. Here we are at the 15th annual conference, and thank you for being here, because obviously without you there would be no conference, and I'd be speaking to Mark, Aimee, and Howie, and that just, although it would certainly be fulfilling, it wouldn't be as nice and as fruitful as this. So my talk today is, as you can see from the title, Religion and Citizenship in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, and asks the question that will this portend the end of disbelief? And you've probably been wondering why, oh why, are we going to be talking about AI this year and not next year? Because as you know in your programs, next year's theme is going to be on technology and citizenship. Consider this, please, to be sort of a precursor. And some of you with whom I've interacted today have been wondering, what could we possibly contribute as an abstract for next year's conference? Well, hopefully this will then whet your appetites and make you think of things that you could then go ahead and provide and present for next year, because we would love to have you back. So if this then gets the collective intellectual juices going, then so be it. So I'm going to go ahead and inadvertently date you as far as how old you are by some of the images I'm going to show. How many of you are familiar with, and I apologize and I beg your indulgence because I know that we do have an international audience here today, which I'm always thrilled as it expands. Danger Will Robinson from the show Lost in Space. Okay, excellent. And by the way, that's the robot. The 50th anniversary this year of 2001, A Space Odyssey, the great Stanley Kubrick opus. All right, I'm surprised. Prasenjit, I can't believe you haven't seen this movie. It is a philosophical masterpiece. War Games, 1983. All right, I know at least there's one person who is a movie fan, so. AI, 2001. Okay, I'm seeing that things are sort of starting to dwindle here. The HBO series Westworld. Okay, so bonus points. How about the movie from the 1970s with Yul Brynner, Westworld? Yes, the Michael Crichton one. Okay, this is not a movie. So the recently departed great theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking said that success in creating AI would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last, unless we learn how to avoid the risks. In the long term, world militaries are considering autonomous weapons systems that can choose and eliminate targets. This was, of course, one of his big anxieties regarding the militarization of technology. And I think certainly, and that might be a hint for anybody who's looking for a paper topic for next year, how militarized technology informs citizenship. So I hope to see several abstracts in that regard. But the idea that Hawking has devoted this level of interest to a topic of AI, although of course he was a pioneer in our conceptualization of black holes and things happening beyond the bounds of our Earth, gives people like us pause to then consider and take seriously what are going to be the implications of AI. The fact that Hawking had amplified it to this degree of importance, in a sense, then makes it important for myself. But a lot of you might be asking, what exactly is artificial intelligence? So the garden variety definition is that it is the science of making computers do things that require intelligence when done by humans. And of course, as Michael Corleone would say in The Godfather Part 2, we are all part of the same hypocrisy. We all engage and interact with AI on a daily basis. And it doesn't have to be with Siri, but any app that you may find. And in fact, even in the pre-app world of GPS, we find that artificial intelligence has actually been something that has been part of our lives for quite some time. I say that as a way to not make AI as pernicious as some might expand it to be. Related terms to AI are the following. You hear self-awareness as being a primary element of AI, especially a clarion call to worry. What will happen with AI achieving self-awareness? The classic example from Hollywood is 2001: A Space Odyssey, where HAL 9000, the computer on board the spaceship, has an episode where it seems, and I apologize for giving away part of the plot, Prasenjit, because you haven't seen it, about the notion of a computer achieving the level of self-awareness that it can even become paranoid, and then have some kind of a toxic consequence for human beings, if not for itself. Well, notwithstanding the fears of paranoia, we need to understand that self-awareness is related to three different concepts. First of all, artificial consciousness. The second is machine consciousness. And the third is what we would call a kind of synthetic consciousness, which is an amalgam of not just artificial and machine consciousness, but the human element as well. Notions of awareness, memory, learning, anticipation, as well as the ability for AI to have a subjective experience well beyond just something that is algorithmic. Ray Kurzweil, who is perhaps arguably one of the leading voices in examining and exploring artificial intelligence, has said that 2029 is the consistent date that he's predicted for when an AI entity, and we should start calling these entities, will pass a valid Turing test. For those of you unfamiliar, Alan Turing was the British scientist and codebreaker who gave us the Enigma machine. And also, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, I invite you to see the movie The Imitation Game, which had the always incredible Benedict Cumberbatch, who probably would have won the Oscar that year for Best Actor, but he lost out to the at least equally compelling performance by Eddie Redmayne of, you guessed it, Stephen Hawking in the movie The Theory of Everything. He talks about how the Turing test of a machine's ability to achieve a certain level of functionality will then reach levels of human intelligence. And he has set the date 2045 for a very specific term, singularity, which is going to be when there is the multiplication of effective intelligence a billionfold by merging with the intelligence that we have already created. And I'll explain a little bit more what technological singularity means. Essentially, this is going to be the point in the timeline where human and artificial intelligence converge. And from that point on, artificial intelligence will expand and eclipse human intelligence. Now, how does this relate to citizenship? Well, AI, as we already know, is affecting societies. And I'd like to take a look at an example of where this is occurring at the macro level. Automation and economics. See, I promise that it's not going to be too tech-heavy of a conversation today. Employment. The number one occupation in 27 out of the 50 American states is truck driving. 10 million Americans are truck drivers. We find that this is not the only area of transportation in which automation is becoming more of a reality. Taxi drivers, factory workers are all dealing with automation as an emerging field, and some would even argue an emerging competition. In fact, according to Oxford University's recent study, 45% of current jobs may simply vanish within the next 20 years because they will be replaced by automation. Human beings, in essence, will become redundant. What is going to be the ripple effect of these kinds of economic paradigm shifts brought about by automation? How is it going to affect societal stability not only in the locus of automation, but in concentric circles going out from there? What is going to be the discontent of making machines too efficient and too effective? In essence, algorithmic optimization. I'm going to go ahead and incriminate somebody here. Who's been to McDonald's recently? Okay. Have any of you gone to the Golden Arches and interacted with a machine like this? So this is actually a photograph of a machine at a McDonald's in Doha, Qatar, a photograph that I took. And I feel the need to go ahead and give this disclaimer. I didn't buy anything there. I saved my arteries and my soul by not eating at McDonald's, but I decided to take the picture. It's like saying I just read it for the articles. What's remarkable about this machine is how efficient it is, and how it has reduced the number of individuals working behind the counter, and it has also minimized the amount of human contact that has to occur at McDonald's. There is zero inefficiency by the machine. The order is always perfect. The number of pickles you have ordered will be there on your burger without fail. One doesn't have to then inquire about or ask for anything that has been left out of the proverbial bag. Some of you have been to Target or similar department stores and seen the self-serve kiosks. If one goes to Walmart, one will find a bay of roughly 8 of these kiosks and about 15 cashier registers, most of which are empty. The decimation of cashiers in favor of one person that is occupying 8 self-serve kiosks demonstrates then the phenomenon of the redundancy of human capital when it comes to the retail space. Now, I suppose if we're looking at the glass half full, we can say, what does it really matter? Amazon is getting rid of brick and mortar stores, and so the idea of even having one person at a self-serve kiosk is really a moot point as well. But let's, for the sake of argument, still assume that we live in a world where going to some stores is still part of the human experience. This is one of my favorite vehicles, not because it's a beer truck, but because this was unveiled 3 weeks before the 2016 presidential elections. Budweiser unfurled a self-driving truck. And I know that seems oxymoronic that the truck would be hauling beer because of the whole idea of drinking while driving, but I assure you that you no longer have to worry about that if the truck is self-driving. Now remember, I said that 10 million Americans are truck drivers. If sometime in the near future, within a generation, we have self-driving trucks, that is going to have a ripple effect on not just 10 million individuals, it will have an impact on 10 million families and the communities in which they reside. Similarly, we have the self-driving Uber. No longer do you have to worry about a taxi, no longer do you have to worry about, bless you, driving yourself. We now have Uber doing this. And last year in Dubai, Tesla sold Dubai 200 self-driving Ubers. Now, there is an estimate that within a decade, the entire taxi fleet of Dubai will become self-driving. 95% of Dubai's population is non-Emirati. 100% of its Uber driving fleet is comprised of foreign workers who are there simply on work permits. That means that over time, as Dubai decides to automate and become self-driving in its taxi ranks, all of those foreign workers will be repatriated, or put in another way, deported, back to countries like Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Philippines, and Indonesia. Countries where the economic carrying capacity is already at a tenuous and a dubious level. So with this population from Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and elsewhere, coming back to countries where the economic buoyancy is already questionable, one can then see what the ripple effect of automation, particularly in the purview of self-driving cars, may have. As Hawking predicted, AI self-awareness in the military is becoming not something just of science fiction, but is becoming a matter of contemporary fact. The idea that drones are already abound, but now we're having something out of Star Wars Episode II, The Clone Wars, really a clone army of automated personnel. And the fact that if there's the possibility of them achieving self-awareness, how is that going to be marshaled by defense forces? Now, this is one of my favorite aspects of citizenship when it comes to AI and objective beauty. And that's why I have it in quotation marks. 2 years ago, there was an online beauty contest where pictures were solicited from anyone who wanted to submit them, under the auspices that the jury would be AI. One no longer had to worry about human beings and their biases, conscious or otherwise, coming in and judging the beauty contest. This would level the proverbial playing field. Unfortunately, what was to be the aspired outcome didn't really happen. In fact, out of the 44 winners, nearly all of them were white. There was a handful of Asians and one person with dark skin. So quite clearly, we find that AI is not an insulator from biases. And of course, given the structure of the beauty contest, it simply means that the biases of the programmer then were translated into the actual technology. And so the idea then that how will AI potentially essentialize whiteness? How will AI potentially essentialize the Anglophonic world are also elements that could have a profound impact on citizenship and the structure of society. Some countries have actually decided to address the issue of AI head-on. Here we find, and of course they always say that such matters are wasted on the youth, we have Omar bin Sultan al-Ulema, who is maybe right now 28. I'm not sure when exactly his birthday is. But he holds a cabinet position in the United Arab Emirates. He is the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, a brand new cabinet agency within the UAE. Now, on the one hand, we can say that at least they are pragmatic enough to reconcile the fact that as they are buying self-driving automobiles, they are going to be acknowledging and addressing how AI will impact and address their own communities. At the same time, we can go ahead and say that here is a 28-year-old who's holding a major policy and decision-making position. I hope he's eaten his vegetables as a child in order to have the requisite nutrition and intellectual wherewithal to handle such an issue. While in the Persian Gulf, this is Sophia. Sophia is a robot. Sophia also is a female robot, which I know for some of you, knowing the anthropological arc of Saudi Arabia, will be inquiring whether she will be eligible to drive in June when the kingdom is finally going to allow women to drive. It may not be necessary if there's self-driving cars in Saudi Arabia. But what's more important to our particular inquiry here is that Sophia has, as a robot, Saudi citizenship, something which 70% of the population living in Saudi Arabia does not have and probably will never have, Saudi nationality. So the idea then that an artificial intelligence entity can have citizenship rights over a human being is a reality in real time now. By the way, most Saudis don't look like that. I mean, notwithstanding the hair, so actually she's conforming to the modesty requirements of Saudi society, but I haven't met too many Saudis with blue eyes, so just saying. These are boneka robots in Japan. They are, to put it euphemistically, the new geishas. Japan, for some reason, has a fascination with pleasure robots. Japan also provides a remarkable case study of the impact of artificial intelligence on a specific locale. It is a country that has a population of about 127 million, 1/4 or slightly over 1/4 of which lives in the Tokyo-Yokohama metropolis. It is also a population growth of under 1%. It has a negative population growth. And you see here that most of the population is between the ages of 14 to 65, but you have a graying population with 27.4% over the age of 65. A birth rate of only 1.4, and a phenomenon of a society that is not really too interested in getting married. This is not any longer seen as a matter of a socially iconic factor. Now, Japanese society is decidedly complex. I was having a very nice conversation earlier about patriarchy, as well as, shall we call it, ethno-chauvinism that exists within Japan. But there's other quirks that exist within Japan. There is a fascination, call it an obsession, with anime, with manga, and with boneka robots, to the point where people aren't having sex either for reproductive or even recreational reasons under the age of 40. Well, these factors are certainly then informing the negative population growth as well as a birth rate which is well below the replacement rate which would be needed for society to sustain itself. This at a time when Japan is trying to come back from the doldrums of its economic downturn and maintain its buoyancy at right now the number 3 position in the world economically. How then to solve these issues? Well, one possible solution is immigration. And currently in Japan, we have roughly about 2 million foreign workers concentrated from the following countries: the Philippines, Brazil, China, as well as Korea. The problem, though, with Japan is whether to confer citizenship on these foreign workers because of a fear that this would then upset the sociological ethos of the country. Well, if it's not going to be immigrants that are going to be doing the proverbial heavy lifting, then the only other solution is, given the fact that birth rates don't really have much of a forecast of increasing anytime soon, is automation. How then is Robot Japan going to change the demographics, the ethos, and the citizenship of Japan and how it relates to it? So a little story about how I got into AI and my fascination with it. I was at a conference at MIT about 1.5 years ago, and it was on the theme of forbidden research. And one of the panels that was involved was discussing, because this is apparently a phenomenon, sex with child robots as a way to divert pedophiles' impulses on human beings. And I began to think about issues because, as Mark will have me do, citizenship is always on the mind. And I started asking some questions then about how is this going to affect societies. On the surface, it seems as though it is a good idea to protect the sanctity of children, to prevent pedophiles who are predisposed to incline toward children to move towards something that is mechanical. But at the same time, is there the possibility that the pedophile will seek a more quote-unquote real experience? And as such, then how real will the robot have to be made in order to keep the pedophile away from a human being? How human is human? Is there such a thing as being too human? Will there be any way to distinguish then between the human and the AI? What about the possibility in a different arena of hybrid human beings, cyborgs, which of course are generally the province of science fiction movies and television shows. But what does it then mean to be human as prosthetics become more prevalent, especially with their own ability to think cognitively? AI is going to make us rethink what it means to be human. A presumption that we have had as human beings, as a species, for quite some time. Ontology has generally been something that is self-evident for human beings. What will it mean that as AI becomes human-like, or as more personhood is attributed to it, for us then either as a way to distinguish ourselves from AI, or to have to reassess ourselves of what has it meant to be human all along? How are these debates and how are these discussions going to be constructed? Along with that is the related subject of then, when does life begin? Is it from an activation date? Is it a point of gestation? When is conception for a robot? When we think of human conception, we think, of course, when sperm and egg come together. Is conception something of being the first time a marker reaches a dry erase board and somebody is trying to conceive of a new AI project? René Descartes, of course, said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Will, at the point where AI thinks, will it start thinking that it is? And what then is going to be the ontological inquiry that AI will have with itself? So the ethical considerations that were spawned of my day or two at MIT were the following. Will AI have consent? Will it have the right of refusal? Can it, for example, say, I don't want an upgrade, especially if the task that is being ascribed to it is something that is inimical to its core programming? What about the idea of algorithmic optimization? Do we have a responsibility to make the robot as smart as it is, or can it be, as the movie Animal House would say, fat, drunk, and stupid? Can we keep the robot purposely stupid in order for it to not question things that ethically human beings would not do, but we would allow the robot to discharge with complete impunity? What about citizenship? As more and more personhood is ascribed upon AI, does citizenship and do rights and responsibilities get triggered? And if so, with whom? As we know, citizenship is usually something that is transacted between the individual and the state. Who will be a stakeholder when it comes to the citizenship? Will it be citizenship rights and responsibilities with the state? Will it be citizenship rights and responsibilities with a corporation? Or will it be some kind of melange of the two? Military ethics. How is it going to be if a drone refuses to drop a bomb on a particular target? Does it have the option to do so? Does it have the option to think for itself? And also saving lives. Whose life is worth saving and how many lives are worth saving? Think of a thought experiment here. If there is a self-driving car and the car is driving the CEO of a multinational company and the car is programmed to save the life of its passenger, to what extent can it take evasive action in order to do so? Can it, for example, avoid an obstacle on the highway or on the road, move over, swerve, jump the curb, and as 5 children are playing, take them out, proverbially? Will there be a utilitarian analysis or calculus as to whose life is worth saving? Is it simply quantitative, or is it going to be based on current earning potential? A millionaire in a car is certainly earning a whole lot more money than our 5 children playing ball on the side of the road. These kinds of ethical applications and these kinds of ethical inquiries are certainly ones that have to be made by those companies that currently are looking at self-driving vehicles. Religion and AI. Of course, it's fairly simple to then go ahead and see how rights and responsibilities and the transactionability of these can be explored when it comes to AI and citizenship. But how does religion fit into this? So I took a look at whether currently there are religions that have within them the architecture to conceptualize or to accommodate for AI. And I was taking a look at Jewish ethics, in which you have the notion of mankind having received power to improve upon creation, to develop technologies to achieve them, contingent upon appropriate safeguards being put in place. And this should be fairly simple to go ahead and understand. Yes, but with qualifications. The idea that, according to the Talmud, humans have the potential to create worlds and even life. Well, if AI is going to be then seen as analogous to life, then from a Jewish perspective, this, of course, is available to be done. Rambam says, even the heavenly spheres are alive in a way we cannot understand, which seems to then indicate that even if the full comprehension of AI is not understood, that there is the ability for AI to then proceed, again, with requisite safeguards, provided that it is not causing more harm than good. The Jewish approach of cautionary and methodical evolution seems to be a template which could be followed. But I'm also intrigued by the golem, the idea of this totemic creature which at various points in Jewish history and lore has been deployed. So here we find, for example, the Prague golem, which can serve to then be the focus or the locus of fear and anxiety, or it can then also be seen as a totemic creature outside that of the human experience. I like this model. The idea then that AI could in fact be a golem, that it could be seen either without a value judgment, or it could be seen as a force of good, or it could be seen as a force of potential harm. From an Islamic standpoint, is there room for AI? And I think the simple answer is, like the Jewish example, yes, but. There is a presumption of lawfulness, particularly when it comes to the sciences and technology, that everything is halal unless there is a reason to declare it not. Given the agency of man within the Islamic conception, there is the Quranic verse that man is the vice-regent on earth, that he holds deputized authority for God on earth, and is encumbered with the task of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. So again, we find that, like in Judaism, there are mechanisms for a qualification of something without necessarily categorically excluding it or prohibiting it. Tantamount to this model is the notion of niyyah, or intention. There has to be a productive or a positive intention for these things to occur. I'm always intrigued by the idea of whether a robot is going to be seen as a man, as an angel, or as a jinn. Within the Islamic cosmology, a lot of it has to do with essence. Man, according to Islamic tradition, is created of dust or clay and has free will. Angels are created of light and have no free will. Their only purpose is to worship God. And the jinn is composed of smokeless fire, and like man, has free will. So will AI be like man or the jinn, coming from a different composition or essence, silicon, and have free will? Or will it be more like an angel, which is predetermined by its creator and operating within the strictures of those parameters to do the bidding of humankind? But there's another fascinating element to Islamic cosmology, and this has more to do with the end time theory, the notion of the Dajjal, the Anti-Messiah. Within this model, it is believed that the Dajjal will in fact create something which seems to resemble AI. He will create a statue that will come to life, and that statue will have therapeutic, healing, and maybe even salvific powers, so much so that it will compel people to start worshiping it in, of course, a rather blasphemous manner, in an idolatrous manner, but at the same time, nonetheless, showing how AI from an Islamic perspective could be then seen by many people as a prophecy fulfilled, signaling the end time, and of course having people adapt to making that prophecy come real. From the standpoint of Christianity, we have, of course, the biblical verse that blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and whose spirit there is no deceit. It comes from Psalms. Well, the possibility of AI being able to preempt, maybe even prevent sin from happening, is going to have a profound impact on the very structure of Christianity when it comes to salvation through Jesus Christ. If AI is going to be able to preempt sin from even happening, then is there really going to be the notion of a collective fallenness such that then Christ's intervention would even be relevant within that? What about the idea of creating AI within our own image? What does that really mean beyond the physical? And is there the possibility of moving toward a Darwin-esque paradigm shift when we see AI? Of course, we know that 101 years ago, when Darwin authored The Origin of Species, many people thought that this was about some birds in the Galapagos, but of course it provided for some rather odious aspects of intervention with Darwin's theories that led to biological determinism, eugenics, and even the dehumanization which caused genocide to also become rife. I wonder then that will this also lead to a derobotization in the name of religion. So how does this then all play into the notion of using religion, citizenship, and AI? Well, citizenship is in essence a dialectic of the transaction of rights and responsibilities between the individual and the state. The source of such rights is a matter of considerable interest and exploration in the study of political philosophy. In fact, Francis Fukuyama contends that, quote, rights derive in principle from three possible sources: divine rights, natural rights, and what one might call contemporary positivistic rights located in law and social custom. Fukuyama adds that rights derived from revealed religion are not today the acknowledged basis for political rights in any liberal democracy. Rights, in other words, can emanate from God, the nature, or man himself. There is the possibility then that AI might consider its human creator to be God, from where it derives its rights. Similarly, it could regard its origin of rights to be man, in this sense in a non-divine capacity. If and when AI achieves self-awareness, would it regard its creator as being non-divine or divine? If it perceived its creator as God, would it be in an Aristotelian manner or in an Abrahamic conception? In other words, would its programmer be a prime mover that created it in its original state and allowed it to embark on its own path of evolution, or would it be engaged in a continuous, intrusive relationship by which it would be responsible for any and all upgrades, reprogramming, and hardware maintenance? And if AI were to eschew human agency, divine or otherwise, as the source of its rights, what would be the scope and scale of its quote-unquote natural rights? The notion that AI would perceive its rights as inherent and self-evident would make for a compelling exercise in conversation. For AI to assert natural rights as the basis for its citizenship, it would require a self-awareness of its own ontology. At what point does AI evolve beyond its original morphology and beyond the original creator-creation version? In other words, and to place it within the human analog, and to again invoke Darwin, when does AI cease to be an ape and become a robo-sapien? Philosophers will contend that everything with consciousness evolves. If so, will AI be allowed to have a voice in the deliberative and participatory process of citizenship? And what if their religion is outside the purview of what is acceptable for a proverbial seat at the table? In the architecture of John Rawls' political pluralism, a prerequisite to participation in the pursuit of overlapping consensus is for all participants to leave their respective moral frameworks, especially those constructed by religion, at the door and engage in a secular discursive exercise. Given the existing challenges of genuine and inclusive engagement involving so-called human religions, the involvement of an AI-derived religion will require as yet untested leaps of faith. Pun fully intended. Citizenship is often informed by various contingencies that differentiate its deployment. For example, age serves as a line of demarcation for certain rights to be vested from the standpoint of citizenship. As such, how does age play a factor in AI? Does AI in fact have an age? Will it be determined by that activation point of the technology? If the AI entity receives an upgrade, arguably it may be a sign of aging. But the robot remains perennially a certain empirical age. Can or should and will its rights remain static to its youth, or will its rights evolve when it reaches the AI age of maturity? Will AI be treated as a species or as a spirit? And here we find then the intersectionality of religion and citizenship. We have had a rather dubious record with both interspecies and intraspecies relations. For the former, the expansion of the endangered species and extinction lists, and I just found out that giraffes are now on the endangered species list. I'm sorry. Extinction lists of various flora and fauna continues unabated. In the purview of the latter, biological determination, racial taxonomy, and eugenics are but a few of the vehicles deployed to otherize, dehumanize, brutalize, and even annihilate entire populations. At the same time, invoking Nietzsche, we killed God off nearly 150 years ago, but depending on one's faith persuasion, he was either never there, never gone, has been resurrected, or has been resurrected. In her seminal work, Believing in Belonging, Canadian scholar Abby Day makes the distinction between anthropocentric and theocentric conceptions of cosmology. She contends that anthropocentrics articulate their beliefs primarily in reference to their human relationships, whereas theocentrics cite God and the relationship to a deity as central to their lives. With the advent of AI and the prospect of its attainment of self-awareness, a third category of belief orientation may have to be acknowledged to accompany anthropomorphism and theocentrism, that which I would coin talanocentrism, a robot-centered perception from the Greek mythological talanos. Will it then be plausible that AI will perceive the world through its own talanocentric, albeit human-endowed eyes? What will be the implications of that reality and the realization of that causality by AI when it achieves and gains self-awareness? As with intraspecies and interspecies issues, the interaction of anthropocentric and theocentric human beings is hardly that smooth and harmonious endeavor all the time. How then will talanocentrism reorganize fissures as well as lines of demarcation? Well, Day delineates 7 beliefs or dimensions of belief: content, sources, practice, salience, function, place, and time. These various elements create the architecture of a believer's relationship and sense of belonging to not just a belief system, but I would also argue their sense of citizenship. It is important to recognize that each of these dimensions exists beyond the spiritual component of belief. They address the realm of social engagement itself. For Day, relocating belief to the social illuminates our understanding of people's propensity to sometimes associate causality with suprahuman forces such as fate. It will therefore be fascinating to witness 2 developments on the horizon: how AI's sense of belief as it comes to term with the causality of its creation and existence, let alone its purpose, develops, and the evolution of human belief in the causal link of AI as it provides therapeutic, ameliorative, even redemptive, if not salvific, benefits to humankind. Could AI inadvertently portend the end of disbelief qua the end of atheism? Which almost seems counterintuitive when we think of science as being something, as Nietzsche would say, killing off God. The citizenship of AI will depend in part upon the ontology of AI. If it is categorized as a species or a subspecies, AI will fall under the auspices of how physical entities are framed as citizens. If AI is defined as no species, then according to Stamos, not John, species nominalism would place AI in the realm of the unreal or an abstract entity. While in one regard the implications upon citizenship could be quite profound, it is instructive to acknowledge that the citizenship of unreal entities is already a reality, as corporations have been ascribed personhood for legal systems for decades. Perhaps AI will similarly blur the need for the distinction between the real and less or unreal entities vis-a-vis citizenship. But at the same time, while the classification of AI may lack distinct lines of demarcation in the legal purview, it may have significant and considerable implications on the religious engagement with AI. Which then brings me to my final question. Will AI kill off atheism? Will we now be compelled to believe in something? Or put in another way, will we be compelled to not believe in nothing? Will AI cause belief to be compelled to believe in something, either the divine or the designed? Will AI as a new species cause atheism to become an endangered philosophical species, and possibly an extinct one? Well, if AI is seen to have the kind of therapeutic, redemptive, and salvific impact on humankind and society, then the answer perhaps is yes. There is either the choice of believing in a deity or believing in something designed. The implications of AI on religion and citizenship will be profound and pervasive either way. As the debates emerge and become increasingly complex, the only unacceptable response to the manifold questions that will be raised, ironically, is, I don't believe you. Thank you. Time for some questions? And Amy told me to be done by 5:30, and it is 5:30. So with all deference to those of us who are here from Switzerland, I tried to be as punctual to Swiss precision as possible. Yes, your question. Yes.
So, thank you for your talk. That was very insightful. To me, it seems that you are suggesting that it would be possible probably to interact with AI within the framework of citizenship or order that we have. But some have also, for instance, argued that one of the programming functions would be to solve our problems and to remove the difficulties. And what would happen, and this could be a real worry, if the machines identify humans to be the problem. So if they reach that conclusion, then the dialogue, the whole discourse will change, or could change at least. So is that a bit too far, or?
No, I don't think it's too far. Did everyone hear the question about whether, and I'll beg your indulgence, I'm going to try to stay away from the Terminator model of cyborgs turning on human beings. I think that science fiction does a disservice to essentializing that as being the way that this issue would be framed. But if AI is seen as something strictly through the lens of utilitarianism, and the more personhood that is attributed and ascribed to AI, and if the line of demarcation becomes further blurred between human and AI, then why would human beings not be seen as a potential threat to AI? After all, there has to be something said about reflexivity. And if we are sitting here coming up with the possibility that AI poses a threat to us, in whatever capacity that might be, then arguably as AI develops self-awareness, it will have the same ethical construct and framework by which it will perceive us. That is something that then has to be debated when it comes to how much personhood is given to AI. Because it is inevitable that whatever is given will also then have the ability to take something as well. Yes?
One comment and then a question. The comment is how you finish. I couldn't help thinking, when you're talking about believing in something designed, people already believe in something designed, right? Intelligent design. And instead of looking backwards, intelligent design with technology could become prophetic about the future, right? Because what is this except designing life the way that you want it to be. The question, and it's mostly serious, is on the slide that you showed of the car, the self-driving Uber, I noticed on the side it says liberate.com, and the question is, I mean, to me that's just, I couldn't stop thinking about that and thinking, what are they liberating us from, right? And are they liberating us from the work of driving or the responsibility for what happens?
I think the answer is yes, meaning to both of those questions. Getting back to the comment regarding intelligent design, it is still within the theocentric paradigm. It is still a matter of causality that intelligent design, in fact, is of divine agency. As I said before, I think it's going to be very compelling that there's going to be this tipping point, to borrow from Gladwell, where AI could jettison itself from the moorings of its human-created causality to start exploring then its own trajectory. Because after all, if modernity has taught us anything, and the philosophy that developed, particularly in the 19th century, is that not what humankind has done as well? So I'm not sure then that we could restrict AI, if it develops that kind of cognitive consciousness, from being precluded to doing the same.
And so that's like 35% of all Star Trek episodes ever, right?
I would actually say 37.5, but we're in the same ballpark. Yeah.
I'm going to say it's a non-scientific estimate.
Yeah, the one that doesn't apply is the tribbles.
Right.
Okay. So, yes.
Your lecture opened with a lot of worry about what impact AI is going to have on the labor force and automation, and that may destabilize countries and so on. Is it possible that AI in that context is a red herring, and actually the issue is not one of technology but of capitalism, and actually the issue is distribution? I mean, you could imagine an economic model, I mean, socialism, for example, or what Marx called true communism, where the more automation there is, the less work there is for people to do, and the more leisure we will have. The issue is that the leisure is concentrated in a very small number of people, and not in most of the population will lose out. So I guess what I'm asking is it possible that all the fear that we have in our imagination about AI is actually a displaced fear of other things, inequality, questions of economic distribution, destabilization, in a similar kind of way that, that Frankenstein was a metaphor for other things about the advent of modernity and nationalization and so on.
I agree with you. I think that there's a possibility. So this then requires us to then perhaps broaden the scope of looking at impact. And I mentioned Japan as one case study. And we see here what are the impacts of, for example, automation, and particularly when it comes to robots for social engineering, if you will. But across the South China Sea, or the Sea of Japan, my geography is failing me at this point, in China, the impact of robots there is now being considered as a device for population control. That which is seen as problematic in Japan because it is reducing a population, which is then going to affect its economic buoyancy, could be in China a way to benevolently cull the population by simply lowering the birth rate, which could become much more efficient for the distribution of resources within an economic model of China. So I think this is, I wouldn't categorize this inquiry as premature, but I think it's an important one to then decide how do we reconcile the micro and the macro level of the kinds of consequences that you're talking about. So, Howie.
Let me blur the line between science and science fiction just for 1 second and just ask, how do you think Isaac Asimov, he was writing science fiction, but in a sense when he spoke about AI, robots, he did create 3 laws. So I mean, could Isaac Asimov's approach be the beginning of a series of commandments, so to speak, that could regulate? And I think his own original 3 laws and dispel a lot of these constructed by human beings to be automatically automatically subservient to human beings, incapable of doing harm to a human being, doesn't that dispel a lot of the basic fear here?
So the three laws are the following. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first. And then, let me see, what is the third one here?
The robot should protect itself.
Has to protect itself. So I'm going to go ahead and play...
Violates the unless it contradicts with the first two.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and play robot's advocate here. Why should a robot ab initio be prohibited from bringing harm to a human being?
As when I've said so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him here to go ahead and defend himself, so that's okay. No, I mean, this is one of those dilemmas that if AI is going to be brought to the water's edge of being ascribed with all of these attributes, then should it not be allowed to have a symmetrical and a reflexive relationship with human beings? Why is it that human beings then, by inference, are allowed to destroy robots if they feel as though robots may harm them? Why is that a restriction that is only placed on the robot?
To defend Asimov, isn't what Asimov's saying that however intelligent and independent thinking AI becomes, ultimately the bottom line is AI is the creation of human intelligence. I mean, at least from the start. And even when AI is able to create and reproduce itself, it still is ab initio the product of human intelligence, and that's why, with respect to AI, humans are the creators and can be in a position of, well, non-subservience.
Sure. So let's take a look at the second law, that the robot must obey the orders. So it therefore will have no agency to make up these minds. That if a human being goes ahead and programs a robot to do something that is either unethical or illegal if a human being did it, basically a sort of a proxy, does it then have the responsibility to obey its human quote-unquote master?
But you can't do something unethical because it can't harm a human being.
Well, I mean,
Asimov
there's...
got you there.
No, he didn't. I mean, there's ways... what does it mean to harm a human being? Maybe not physically harm a human being, but what about, I don't know, poisoning a water supply? It is done secondhand.
Well, again, Asimov created those stories where human beings can manipulate the robots.
Sure.
But that's a human problem. It doesn't really relate to, you don't need to have moral humans. You don't need to have freedoms for AI. Asimov was always saying that robots can be perfect as long as humans don't mess them up.
Do you not think that a free-thinking robot could serve as a check and balance against some of the more illicit and unethical human impulses?
Absolutely, but only as a cost, and the costs are everything the fears are.
But see, these are the conversations that need to happen.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this.
So, is this going to be next year's conversation that we have?
Absolutely.
I don't know if the Ravitz Foundation will fund this, but I hope they do. No, I mean, I've seen Asimov's laws, and that's why I was scratching my head that how many people are looking at Asimov's laws and feeling emboldened to not only place the restrictions on AI, but also to then have AI do its bidding. Now, I have a student who actually will be here for the conference and the workshop over the weekend, who's a former, obviously, Wayne State student. She's at Harvard Divinity School. And I don't think she'll mind if I divulge what her master's is on. She's looking at Islamic theology and sex with cyborgs. So for those of you who think that faculty members and mentors don't have an influence on their students, obviously something made it to her by osmosis. But it's a fascinating discussion because in Islamic law, there is a distinction between the concubine and the spouse. According to Islamic law, if a woman is a concubine, and of course this goes back even farther than Islam into biblical times, then a man can go unto her, in the biblical sense, I guess in the Quranic sense as well, as his right hand would possess. Meaning that she would be seen as a form of chattel property. But if she is the spouse, well, then it is a completely different relationship. So the question that she's exploring is that if AI is kept as a concubine, how then would Islamic law be triggered, as opposed to AI having self-awareness, having the right to consent, and then would have to be regarded as a spouse. Now, I'm glad that she found an advisor at Harvard Divinity School who will have the stomach for the process, because within the broader Muslim community, she's going to find some very uncharitable and unreceptive people. But it is beyond what is seen as an indulgent intellectual exercise for something that we need to engage with faith communities who generally have a very antagonistic relationship to even explore these kinds of thought experiments. And at the same time, tech is running at a rather rampant speed toward a teleology that even tech doesn't fully comprehend and understand. So the idea of intervention, then, of ethicists, philosophers, theologians, economists, anthropologists, political scientists, seems to be critical. And although the train may have left the proverbial station, at this point, at least the train is not self-driving. And we may still be able to then engage on these very important issues at a time when the tech community actually is having that moment of saying, we don't know where this is going, we don't want to be so hubristic enough to bear the consequences without engaging with other people. And so that opens up a very ripe opportunity for those of us outside the realm of STEM.
I think we can take another
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, please.
I think there's a way of sorting out this architectural and ontological problem that one is facing with the very idea of intelligence and robot and human reciprocal relationship. One is to classify these robots. For example, we can have political robots who will serve a certain kind of function, but that function would be more inclusive, that includes the ethical aspects of life as well. We can have robots which can tackle some of the problems of ethical dilemma as well. Now, if we can develop this, there's a big if there, as a counterfactual, then certain things will happen. But if we are not able to develop this, then those things for which we are aiming to develop this are never going to happen. So therefore, there is this existential limits of, or temporal limits of thinking about a robot as well. Robot is the most unthinkable, the unthought of horizon of human civilization. And at the same time, it is continually interceding into our very thought process of developing something for problem solving. So therefore, we are taking it in an utilitarian sense. While there are larger senses of human freedom and larger aspects of human imagination, some of which are coming in religion and theology, which is far above and far beyond any notion of robot. And that remains as a bigger debate.
Absolutely. And I think apropos to a talk that Howie and I gave last night, the idea of whether AI could solve the dispute over Jerusalem, would there then be the possibility of having this other entity, which is neither Jewish, nor Muslim, nor Christian, nor any other religion, bring in its own Talanocentric perspective on how to deal with this dilemma? First of all, it would have to be a matter of whether anybody would consent to that level of arbitration. But I think, Prasenjit, implicit within your question is perhaps a prerequisite step that needs to happen, and that is for the decommodification of human beings to then go ahead and look at AI in non-utilitarian terms. And I'm not sure if or when that is a possibility to occur, because it seems to be that our intervention with AI, especially within the architecture of globalization, is simply commodifying humankind more and more every day. So it seems as though we're at cross purposes there.
I'm going to let that
Oh,
be.
actually, there's one more.
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
Since Howie mentioned Asimov, and since I do a lot of literature, political philosophy, I'd just like to mention that as far as Asimov, look at him, he seems to suggests that there is a fear. He doesn't, at the end of the day, when he grows as an author, he doesn't believe in the ability to use AI as a solution. First of all, at a certain point, he says, not all ethical dilemmas are the result of evil. Sometimes there are two scenarios, both of them are problematic on a moral level. We need to choose one. Asimov develops a fourth law. And as he mentioned, sometimes when the contradiction between the laws is too great and there's no clear solution, at the end of the day, the robot is self-destructing. In his last novel, probably his best as an author, he says robot can be manipulated, and over a long period of time, the definition of humanity changes, and therefore the first law can be used against certain humans, which are not considered humans anymore.
Exactly.
It would seem that, according to Asimov at least, the future of AI is exactly the future of humanity, and evil continues to exist, not simply by, instead of inclination, simply because basic laws are always open for interpretation.
Absolutely, and I think that's a wonderful point upon which to end. This idea then that how does that intersect with Kurzweil's notion of technological singularity? If this is a reality that is inevitable, and if AI is going to not only reach but then even surpass human intelligence, then the idea that the same ethical and legal constructs that by which human beings are bound, I mean, you're talking, Prasenjit, about that architecture. Well, if AI is bound by those as well, is that problematic? Is it problematic that robots then, which are going to become a reality, have the same kind of ethical construct as us? Is there a possibility that there can be more or less? This then becomes, to borrow from Newton, the law of conservation of ethics. There may simply be a finite ethical paradigm. The only challenge at that point is how it is used selectively or not by each and or either entity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.